today we are just going to be revising chapter 8 and just doing a quick recap of chapter 8, which is a really easy chapter, to be honest. It's just talking about consciousness and the nature of consciousness. Okay. Yep. Okay. Before that, when are we going back to school? Oh, I have no idea when we are going back to school, to be honest. It's all really in the hands of DHHS now to really give the school the clearance to open up. Yeah, we don't have any idea at this point, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, what is consciousness? So obviously you need to know the definition of consciousness. You need to know that consciousness is technically awareness. When you're conscious of something, you are aware of that particular thing. Okay, consciousness is awareness. It's not just awareness of things that are outside of your environment. It's not just consciousness or awareness of things that are in your external world, but also things that are in your internal world. So it's both about being aware of things in the external plus the internal world. So what do we mean by awareness of objects and events in our external world? Well, if I go outside and I hear an ambulance, I automatically become aware of that because it's extremely loud. I see the flashing lights. So that's basically something in my external world, something outside of my being or something outside of me. When I'm talking about being aware of your internal stimuli, like your internal sensations, thoughts, and feelings, it's basically being aware of things that only you can really feel or only you can really understand. So if I'm in class and I don't know, I've eaten a really bad chicken kebab or something at lunch and my stomach starts to grumble and go a bit weird, only I'm going to know that I'm experiencing that pain. No one else is going to be able to feel that on my behalf. So things like pain, things like a little itch you have on your foot or something like that, those are things that only you become aware of because those are internal sensations. Okay. When you think about something in class or when you're thinking about, you're looking at the teacher explaining, but then you're thinking about the party you're going to go to on the weekend, those are internal thoughts. Nobody can read your mind and know that you're thinking about that particular thing at any point in time. So consciousness is both external in nature and it's internal as well, okay? It's both relating to stuff outside of us as well as stuff inside of us. And basically it's at any given time. So consciousness doesn't really stop. It doesn't really ever pause. We are always conscious of something unless we go into obviously, you know, some kind of coma or some kind of brain dead state where we are no longer conscious of our surroundings. But at any given time, we are conscious, okay? Even in those early stages of sleep, you might still hear somebody slamming the door in the other room. You might still hear your parents talking in the kitchen, okay? So we're always conscious to some degree or the other. Okay, so whoops, let me just clear things. Okay, and now we go to the next slide. So that's basically the definition of consciousness, and you do need to know this. It doesn't have to be word to word, but you do need to mention those bold words here. So external world, internal sensations, and at any given time. Those are important keywords. Okay, so when we're looking at the characteristics of consciousness, okay, or how do we describe consciousness? What are some words we might use to describe the features or the characteristics of consciousness? Well, number one, consciousness is personal because like I said before, it's about you and your personal experiences and your perceptions, your judgments, your view of the world, okay? And that's both your internal world and your external environment. Okay, subjective is basically the fact that it's our own view. So when we say subjective, we mean that it's our personalized view. So those two characteristics are very similar to each other. Subjective also means that consciousness will be different from person to person. So if you know you've got 20 students sitting in a class, the way that each student takes in that lesson will be different, okay, depending on how distracted they're getting by other things, depending on maybe one of them has a SAC the next period that they're more worried about. Okay, one of them is maybe really wanting to catch up and do better in their next SAC, so they're paying extra focus and attention. Okay, it really depends, and for that reason, consciousness is different from person to person. So like I said in the previous slide, consciousness is also continuous because consciousness doesn't go away or become empty. It's constantly ongoing, okay? It doesn't just stop. It doesn't just become empty. It does keep going, okay? So as you know, as you get out of your class, you go to recess and then you become conscious of all the other different things in your environment. as you go from recess back to class, you now move into another space where you're now becoming conscious of a whole new different sphere of things in your environment. So that's basically what continuous means. And changing suggests that when we are experiencing consciousness, we're constantly going from one state to another. So what that really means is that we are going from, we are going from a state of maybe being very focused in class to going outside and just kind of having basic focus, because we're not focusing on like learning difficult concepts. And then maybe going back into a boring class that we don't like and going into a state of daydreaming where we're just like, oh, when is the bell gonna ring? Okay. And then maybe when you go home, you feel so tired from school, so you have a nap. Okay. That's a different state of consciousness because that's sleep. Okay. It's not like you're awake anymore. So obviously, because we're constantly changing every day our conscious states from one state to another, that's why we say consciousness is changing. Okay. Because every day, depending on what we're doing, depending on where we are, depending on what we think of a particular situation, we will be constantly changing from one state of consciousness to another. So those are basically what we call as the characteristics of consciousness. Okay, so if we ask you to identify one characteristic of consciousness and describe it, you could choose any of these and just give the quick kind of definition or description. Alrighty, next slide. Okay, the next thing we're looking at is consciousness as a psychological construct. So in very simple terms, what do we mean by a psychological construct? Well, a psychological construct is basically an example of a concept or a phenomenon that we know exists, but we cannot directly observe or measure that particular construct. And consciousness is one example of a psychological construct, but you've got others. So if you were going to ask somebody, okay, what is happiness? What is love? What is sadness? That person would be able to describe that to you. But when it comes to like asking them, okay, can you prove to me that there is such a phenomenon as love? Can you measure love for me? Can you measure happiness for me? It's a lot difficult to measure those concepts, but we 100% know that those concepts exist, but we can't directly observe or measure happiness or sadness. Of course, we do give indicators for them. Like if someone is smiling, they might be happy, but you know, if someone's smiling, maybe they're sad on the inside. So we don't really know, okay, for sure. Consciousness is similar. So if I'm in a class like this teacher here, if I'm in a class and I'm teaching a bunch of students and all of them are looking at me, they're all smiling, except the last boy there, they're all kind of smiling, they all kind of like look like they're engaged in the lesson. Maybe they're not. Maybe one of them is thinking about her cats. Maybe one of them is thinking about ice cream. I don't know what this girl's thinking about. Anyway, this boy is thinking about a car. Okay, so you know, a lot of the different kind of things that people think about show you or give you an idea of what they are actually conscious about. But as a teacher standing in front of the class, you would never know if your student is simply daydreaming or actually paying attention. So that's why we say consciousness is a psychological construct, because yes, I can stand in the front of the class and say, yep, all my kids are looking at the projector, they're all taking notes, looks like they know what they're doing, but actually they might be scribbling in their book, but actually they might be daydreaming. They might just be looking at the screen, but their mind is somewhere else. Okay, so that's why we say consciousness, we know it exists, we know that it's a thing, but we cannot directly for sure observe or measure that concept. Okay, I can't look at a student and say, yep, that person is 100% conscious, because we can't actually measure the concept of consciousness. Alrighty, if you have any questions, just put them in the, in the chat box as we go through. All right, so then we look at states of consciousness on a continuum. And so when we're looking at states of consciousness on a continuum, basically what we're really looking at is talking about the fact that, you know, we have different states of consciousness. And these are the different states you need to know. Okay, so according to your study design, you need to know what a coma is. Okay, you don't need to be able to describe it in depth, but just knowing that a coma is on the left-hand side, the most extreme side of a lack of consciousness. Okay, so if I can get my pen. Okay, so yeah, if we talk about coma, so coma is what we call as an oh my God, I can't even write, extreme lack of awareness. Okay, so that's one extreme. The other extreme is focused attention. Now, this is the most kind of extreme presence of awareness that you can have. And focused attention is very different. Oh my God, I cannot write. Okay, presence of awareness. Yeah, you get the point. Okay, extreme presence of awareness. So focused attention is something you're using when you're solving a really difficult methods problem or a really difficult chemistry problem, where you're really trying to analyze what is this research scenario trying to tell me. That's focused attention, okay? Focused attention is different from being in a normal waking state. And I'll tell you what the difference could be. Normal waking state is you guys just sitting in class, maybe listening to me explain a concept the day before the SAC. Obviously, all of you want to know that concept well because the SAC is on the next day. But you're not really solving a problem or you're not really working on a question. You're just listening to me talk about it and try to understand it. Focused attention is the next day on the SAC. If I put in a really hard research scenario question, you're going to then use your focused attention to solve that question. Okay. In the VCAR exams, most students will be using focused attention because they've only got one shot and they've got to do the exam in the best way they can. Okay. No. So when we're looking at focused attention, it's mainly for complex problems. Simple problems might be able to be solved using your, whoops. Oh, I haven't shared the PowerPoint. Oh, it's okay. I think you guys can still see it. What's it called? Yeah, focused attention is mostly for more difficult problems. It's not really for simpler problems, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's basically looking at the different states. Now the ones in between or in the middle are kind of like they are neither extreme lack of awareness, but neither are they an extreme presence of awareness. Whoops, I've got a few questions coming in. Could you give us and say which one? Yeah, so VCAR could give you a scenario in an exam of a person who's daydreaming, and then they might not actually mention in the scenario that the person is daydreaming, but they might say, okay, identify which state of consciousness is reflected by the person in the scenario. And then you would say that it's daydreaming. And then they might ask you, okay, classify whether it's an example of a normal waking consciousness or altered state. So then you would say it is altered state because the person isn't fully conscious and aware of the stuff that's going on around them. Okay, so that's basically looking at those particular states. Now, obviously asleep, when you're asleep, you're not having as much of an extreme lack of awareness as someone who's under anesthetic or someone who's in a coma, but you are still not aware of things that are happening around you. Okay, so that could still be considered to be an altered state of consciousness. When you're hypnotized, you're not really, in your right senses. You're not really aware of everything around you. You're just focusing on one specific stimuli. And so for that reason, hypnosis is also an example of an altered state. Same with meditation, same with daydreaming. So honestly, if you look at this entire diagram here, every single state is almost altered state except for the last two. So from here to here, everything is altered state. And focused and normal waking state are what we call as our normal waking consciousness states. Okay, and obviously every day, like I said, consciousness is changing. So although we might not shift from normal waking state to anesthetic unless we're undergoing a surgery, most of us will go from normal waking state to focused attention to maybe daydreaming to maybe going back to sleep when we get home or at the end of the day. Okay, so that's basically looking at the different states of consciousness. Now, you not only need to know what this state is, you not only need to understand that consciousness is situated on a continuum, that there are different types of states of consciousness, but you also need to understand the purpose. Why do we have this big diagram here with all the different states? And the purpose of the continuum is to show, oops, let me just read this. Yes, so obviously depending on which stage of sleep that you're in, you might be aware of your thoughts. Okay, so if you're in REM sleep, for example, and we'll learn more about sleep as we start chapter 9, but when we're in REM sleep, our brain actually resembles brainwaves that are similar to that of when we are awake. So you might actually start to realize that you're dreaming at some point when you're in REM sleep. Okay, and we call that vivid dreaming because the dreams feel like they're so real. In terms of where we start on the continuum, it really depends. So if we want to, there's no starting point, to be honest. It's just like showing you the range of states of consciousness that a person can go through throughout their life. Okay, with the most extreme state being coma, and the least and the the most extreme lack of awareness being coma, and the most extreme presence of awareness being in focused attention. So not everyone will go through each of these stages in their life. For example, I've never been hypnotized, but then if I have, would I know? Okay, so obviously I've never been hypnotized. I don't think I've never been in a coma. Okay, so those two things, like, you know, you've never been in. So not everyone will go through each of these stages. It's not like a model where you jump from one to the other. Okay, it just is a range of scenarios that people can go through. Yes.
How about death?
Death isn't even on the continuum, because after coma, if I'm going to add another thing here, death would be next to coma on the left-hand side here. So death isn't on the continuum, because when you're dead, that's not a conscious state anymore because you're dead. So coma is like not having any brain activity or very little brain activity. So that's probably the most accurate thing that we can talk about rather than death. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Let me see what other question is this. Yeah, so it depends on what kind of coma you're in. So obviously, if you're in a coma that's classed as a vegetative state means that your brain is like completely destroyed. There is almost little to no activity. Some people are in a coma and they usually wake up, like, it doesn't take them that long to wake up. So it really depends. There are different levels of coma. But again, we would still class each of those types of coma as being an extreme lack of awareness compared to any of the other states on this continuum. But yeah, you're right. Alrighty. Okay, so why do we need this continuum? To see all the different states that a person can experience in their life in terms of consciousness. Obviously, keeping in mind that not everyone will experience every one of those states. For example, not everyone will be under hypnosis. Not everyone will go into a coma. To show that humans are never in a static state. Static means still or not moving. We're constantly moving from one state of consciousness to the other. And the continuum is a visual representation of this idea that we are always shifting from one state of consciousness to another. And like I said before, when I drew those little arrows and showed you which ones are altered states and which one is normal waking, the continuum also helps us to distinguish or differentiate between states of consciousness that are naturally occurring, as well as states of consciousness that are induced. So for example, naturally occurring altered states of consciousness could be something like sleep that occurs naturally. Induced states of consciousness could be something like being hypnotized or being under anesthetic. Okay, all of those things are types of states of consciousness or states of consciousness that are induced. They artificially occur. They don't occur naturally. Okay, you have to put some effort there or go through some procedure to get into that state. Alrighty, so that's basically the purpose of why we need the continuum. If you know at least one reason, one of these reasons, it should be enough. But this is just to give you a holistic idea of why we look at that continuum. Okay, so then we've got two forms of consciousness, all right? So we've got our normal waking consciousness, and we've got it's being presence of extreme awareness, always bad for you. So being in a state of extreme awareness, well, yes, it would be bad for you because like when you're in a state of focused attention, which is extreme awareness, being in that state all the time would not be good for your brain because it actually increases cognitive load, which means that you are overexerting your brain, if that makes sense. So we do need to rest. Obviously, we do need to replenish our brain cells. And so we do need to be able to, have sleep. We do need to be able to switch off from that extreme presence of awareness. Okay, so we can't always be in focused attention. We need to be able to switch in and switch out of it. Okay, so like the continuum says, no one should ever be stuck in one state of consciousness. We should be shifting and changing from one state to the other to remain healthy, in other words. Okay, so when we've got normal waking consciousness and we've got altered state of consciousness, so these are our two types or our two forms of consciousness. If we were to write a nice heading, okay, so if we were to write a nice heading like consciousness, well, it's not a really nice heading because I can barely write with this stupid thing, but oh my God, what have I done now? Go away, clear. Oh my God, how do I get rid of this? Okay, just give me a second. I've done something stupid. Why isn't it closing? Okay, just wait. I'm going to have to minimize this and see. Ah, it went. Okay, good. So like I was saying, consciousness. Okay. Okay, you know what? That's how we spell consciousness for this slide. Anyway, so consciousness is divided into normal waking and altered states of consciousness. So normal waking is basically the state of being awake and aware. It's just basically the same as your definition of consciousness on the first slide. Altered state of consciousness is a different state of consciousness because it is altered, okay? It's very different, it's very changed from normal waking consciousness. And we're going to look at the different characteristics that make an altered state of consciousness altered or make it different from normal waking. And that's basically what we're going to do in the next few slides, okay? So altered state of consciousness is any state of consciousness that is distinctly, that is clearly different from normal waking consciousness in terms of a number of different factors, okay? And we are going to look at these factors in a little bit more depth. And first I will delete everything I scribbled. Good. Oh, I have a question. Yes, your consciousness is in your control. Okay, so obviously, like we said, your consciousness is a personal and subjective thing. So we can control what kind of information comes into our consciousness, what kind of information kind of like leaves our consciousness. And we're going to learn more about this, but there is a condition to this. You can only control what's in your consciousness if you're in a normal waking state. The minute you start to go to sleep, the minute you slip into anesthetic, you can't control what's in your consciousness or what you do. You can't control your behavior. Okay, so that's the kind of reason why you watch those like videos of people that are under anesthetic and they're blabbering like their entire life story. They're saying things they wouldn't normally say in a normal waking state. Okay, that's why when you're dreaming and you know some weird person who you've never met in your life or that you've probably seen once or twice suddenly pops up in your dream. You know, that's the reason why we have really weird dreams where we're like, whoa, how did my brain even think of that? Like, it's, yeah. So essentially that's what we call it, call as content limitations. And we are going to go through that in the next slide or two. Alrighty, so just distinguishing now with some examples. So what are some examples of naturally occurring altered states of consciousness, or we can call them naturally induced? Naturally induced or naturally occurring altered states are sleep, because it occurs automatically. The minute you're feeling tired, you put your head to your pillow, you might fall asleep, okay? That doesn't require any extra effort or processes. Dreaming is also a type of naturally occurring altered state of consciousness because you can't control whether you will dream or whether you will not dream once you fall asleep, okay? Like some days I will not have any dreams, and then other days I will have dreams, okay? Daydreaming, a lot of the time we think we have control over daydreaming, but honestly daydreaming doesn't just happen under our control. In fact, a lot of the time daydreaming is most likely to occur if you're in a situation that is very boring for you. You're doing something repetitive like stacking boxes, which doesn't require any kind of like effort or brain processes, or you're like just sitting on the train or the bus and you're not really actively engaged in something. So those are the conditions under which we are most likely to daydream. Okay, and daydreaming will start to come naturally if those conditions exist or if we are in those situations. Now, what are the induced altered states of consciousness? So induced means that we have to bring them on. We have to go through some process to experience these altered states. So meditation, obviously we can't just meditate naturally. It doesn't happen like sleep. We have to listen to some meditation app, or we have to focus on some stimuli in our environment and block out everything else. So meditation requires some effort on our part. Hypnosis is very similar to meditation. You need to be focusing on one specific stimuli and blocking everything out, everything else. Okay, that requires some extra process on our behalf. It doesn't happen naturally. And the last one that we're looking at is the alcohol-induced ASC. So as the name suggests, alcohol-induced ASC is basically a very sophisticated way of technically saying that somebody is drunk. Okay, if you're drunk, that is basically another word for alcohol-induced ASC. Okay, and we are going to talk about the effects of this when we look at those different factors or those different changes in psychological state. Okay, so let's move, whoops, questions. Yeah, okay, so I don't know why alcohol-induced altered state is not on the continuum. I suppose because it's, I don't know, to be honest. I mean, it's just not on the continuum. I mean, this is the continuum that VCAR have decided to use. It's not the continuum that's used all throughout the world. So I don't know, according to the VCAR continuum, they've just decided not to include it. But I feel like they should have, to be honest. But you can kind of include it yourself if you want. You can place it there somewhere under one of the induced altered states because it is correct. But yeah, according to the diagram in our book, they haven't included it. But it is a very common induced altered state of consciousness, okay, particularly in Australia with the drinking culture and everything. All right, so that's basically, so yeah, from this slide, just know at least 2 examples of naturally occurring altered states of consciousness and 2 examples of induced altered states of consciousness. All right, when we're looking at attention, now before we look at the changes in psychological state, we have to remember that attention is basically extremely important because it determines how conscious we are of any specific stimulus or stimuli. Now attention is defined as concentrating your mental activity or your focus on a specific stimuli or thing while ignoring and excluding other stimuli. Now that sounds a bit technical, but what that really means is that when I say, okay, class, give me your attention, or, you know, direct your attention to the slide on the projector, what you're going to do is you're going to stop everything else you're doing and you're going to look at the slide on the projector and only really focus on that for about 5 or so minutes. Okay, now in normal waking consciousness, we have the ability to focus our attention on what we want, okay, because we can control where our attention goes. In altered state of consciousness, it's obviously a little bit different because we don't have as much control over our consciousness. Okay, now there are 2 types of attention. The 2 types of attention are selective attention and divided attention. And even before doing this chapter, you would already know what these are, or you would have some idea. Selective attention is when you choose and you attend to a specific stimuli whilst excluding others. So like that example I gave you before, you look at that slide on the screen, on the projector, but you block out everything else, okay? Or if I give you a specific tip for the sack, you'll be focusing only on that tip that I'm giving you and not focusing on anything else. So selective attention is important because it allows us to notice and pay attention to some information that we might normally not notice or we might not pay as much attention to. Okay, and we usually only pay selective attention to things that we believe are important. So if I'm walking, if I'm walking into a party or something and then someone's saying my name, okay, in a nearby group, I'm going to automatically tune in my selective attention to that because I'm going to think that maybe they're talking about me. Maybe I want to know what they're saying about me. Okay. Divided attention is your ability to divide or distribute your attention. And with divided attention, we are able to multitask. Essentially what that means is we are able to undertake or participate in 2 or more activities at the same time. So obviously the 2 or more activities that you're multitasking need to be activities that you're pretty good at doing. Okay, if I'm learning to juggle and I can't juggle and then read a book at the same time. It's not going to make sense because juggling is a new thing for me. But if you're really good at texting on your phone and you're really good at writing notes, you might basically be texting and not texting and writing notes, that's a stupid example. Okay, let's say that you're watching an Adrolo video and you're texting on your phone. So you can do both of those things at the same time. Okay, and for that reason, you are using divided attention. Other examples are while you're driving, singing along to a song, singing while in the shower, talking to a friend while jogging. I don't know how that one's possible, but yeah, okay, some people are more physically active than others, so it's probably possible. So divided attention has to be 2 or more activities that you're doing, but they need to be activities that you're really good at doing, or essentially what we call as automatic processes. You're so good at doing that thing that it's almost automatic to you. Okay, so that's what divided attention is. And we can't multitask when we are using selective attention, obviously, because we're excluding any other useless stimuli there. We can only do one task. With divided attention, we can multitask. Alrighty, looking at the methods to study consciousness now. So these are the methods, kind of biological methods or physiological methods that we can use to kind of make some kind of judgment about whether a person is conscious or unconscious. Now, these are not 100% accurate because obviously it's hard to, whoops, it is difficult to be 100% sure that someone is in a conscious state. Things like physical activity, things like how much you sweat can actually throw off some of these measures, but we are going to look at them anyway. So for EEG, EMG, and EOG, which are the first three measures here, we use a specific memory tip when we define those terms, and I'll go into what that actually means. So the first one is the electroencephalograph. So when you are, when a researcher or someone wants to look at your brainwave activity, they basically clip all these little electrodes onto your head, and these electrodes feed some kind of input into the machine, which then is connected to a computer, where you get a reading that looks something like this, okay? And these are not just scribbles, these are actually representing some kind of brainwave. Now, because brainwaves have been removed as a topic, we won't actually be studying them in depth, even in the next chapter. But it's important for you to know that each of these patterns represents a different brainwave, depending on how high or how bunched together the waves are. Okay, so that's what an electroencephalograph is. Now, what was the memory tip from the previous slide talking about? Well, that was a memory tip called DARE. So whenever you're defining anything that starts with electro, so electroencephalograph, electromyograph, electrooculograph, okay, you're going to use the detect, amplify, and record electrical. Okay, that's important. So DARE. Okay, so electroencephalograph detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity in the brain, and that electrical activity is represented as brain waves. Okay, we call this reading, which you can print out, as an electroencephalogram. Okay, like a cardiogram, like basically a reading of the brainwave activity. Now, one limitation of electroencephalograph is that it just shows us what the brain activity is, but it doesn't tell us about what parts of the brain might be activated, okay? What parts of the brain are working harder when the person is doing a particular thing. So it does give us nice detail about the brain activity on a printout or on a page, but it doesn't really tell us which parts of the brain are being activated. Okay, so that is EEG. So that's, remember, electroencephalograph measures your brain wave activity. The next one is, what? Oh, why is this slide just inserted in the middle? That's odd. Anyway, I will come back to that one. Little questions. Memorize the terms. Which terms? If they're keywords that I have highlighted, then yes, you should memorize them. Yes, you do need to memorize, okay? You do need to memorize electroencephalograph. You do need to spell it correctly because these are keywords, and VCA don't really deduct for spelling, but if it's a keyword, they will be kind of strict about that, okay? So just spell it out, electroencephalograph. And it's not so difficult if you just spell it out. The next one is called electromyograph, okay? Electromyograph starts with M. So remember, electromyograph measures the electrical activity in your muscles, which also starts with M. Okay, so the same memory tip we're using is DARE. So electromyograph detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity in the muscles. Okay, so essentially it's the same process. Electrodes are now attached to your skin above all of your important muscles that you might move a lot. Okay, we use the electromyograph a lot for people who move too much in their sleep, like this little princess in this photo here. Okay, so if someone is saying, oh, all I can do when I fall asleep is toss and turn and I can barely have a proper sleep, I wake up feeling like I've run a marathon. Okay, people actually have those issues. And so what we do to actually verify whether this claim is correct is we hook the patient up to an electromyograph. And the electromyograph will actually measure the amount of movement, okay, through measuring the electrical activity in the muscles when that person sleeps. Now, obviously, you know, depending on which stage of sleep the person is in, they might be moving less or they might be moving more. Things like sleepwalking can also be diagnosed through measures like this. So this is not going to make a whole lot of sense right now because we haven't covered sleep, but essentially in very simple terms, that's what the electromyograph is for. It measures your electrical activity in your muscles. Yes, I did skip beta, alpha, theta, and delta brain waves because they have been removed from our study design for the adjusted study design. Yeah, so it's a bit odd, but they shouldn't have removed it in my opinion because you do need it for other topics. But anyway, what can we do? Okay, the next one is the ElectroOculograph. Now, obviously, most of you might be familiar with the word ocular. Okay, ocular is very similar to the word, like, you know, it's connected to your, you know, ocular region of your face, which is obviously connected to your eye. Okay, ocular kind of sounds like the word optometrist, which is, again, someone who looks after your eyes. So ElectroOculograph is a device that detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity in the muscles around your eyes. Very important to write muscles around your eyes, not your eye itself. Okay, your eye is a big, you know, your eye is a very big part of your body. You can't just write it's measuring electrical activity in your eyes. You have to say the muscles around your eyes, because that's what connects to the eye movements. Okay, now same process, electrodes are attached to the muscles around the eye. So you can see in this guy here, he's got electrodes attached right above his eye and under his eye there. So basically, that's the muscles of his eye, and that's where they're located. So every time he blinks or he rolls his eyes around, a little feedback or input is going to be recorded on that little computer there behind him. Okay, now eye activity or measuring eye movement activity is important because it gives us an idea of what type of sleep a person is experiencing. And in the next chapter, when we look at REM sleep versus NREM sleep, you're going to realize that if someone's moving their eyes a lot, it's an indication that they're in rapid eye movement sleep. If they're not moving their eyes much at all, it's an indication that they're in NREM sleep, which is the opposite of that one. Okay, so that's basically the ElectroOculograph. Now, you don't need to know extreme details about any of these, you know, physiological measures. You just need to know the basic ideas which are put on these slides here. Okay. Okay, another way we might measure someone's, what's it called, state of consciousness that they're in is by measuring speed and accuracy on cognitive tasks. So how quickly a task is done or how many mistakes a person makes on a task can actually determine what kind of state of consciousness they're in. So if I'm a coach and someone comes to training and they have to run like 3 laps around the court, if they are very slower than usual or their timing is like way, you know, way above their average and they're taking a very long time to run those laps, I might make this conclusion that because this person came with a hangover or because they're still drunk, they weren't able to give it their best shot and they weren't able to run to that peak or optimal level that they normally do. Okay, same thing, if someone comes to class and we're doing a SAC or we're doing a multiple choice quiz or a Kahoot and someone comes to class sleep deprived, they are not going to do as well on the test because maybe they are still really groggy or they're not feeling that well from not having enough sleep. And so they might be more likely to make more mistakes or more errors in that multiple choice test, okay, compared to someone who had a good amount of sleep. Now, obviously, measurement of speed and measurement of accuracy, they can be influenced by other factors as well. For example, if the person who was drunk took performance enhancing drugs before he came and he still was able to actually run in half the time he did in the previous coaching session, well, that's not something we can control. Okay, these are just normal situations we're looking at in this topic here. Alrighty, whoops, we've got a question. No, you don't need to know why the eyes are moving rapidly. It's just called rapid eye movement sleep. We say it's because in rapid eye movement sleep, the brain is active. And so the eyes kind of roll rapidly as a consequence of that. Okay, but we don't need to know the in-depth reason as to why that happens. All right, but we will go through that anyway a little bit more when we do sleep in the next chapter. Okay, subjective reporting of consciousness. So how can I make other judgments about sleep? I know there's a lot of things about sleep here, but for some reason they've put it all in chapter 8. Subjective reporting of consciousness is that as a sleep researcher, I can actually sit back in a chair and watch a person sleep, okay? Put a video in their room. Obviously, I'm not gonna like go into some person's room and just watch them sleep. That's a bit weird. But I might invite them to my lab. That doesn't make it sound any less weird. Okay, I might invite them to my sleep laboratory and I might actually tell them, okay, this is your room and today I'm going to be evaluating how you sleep and I'm going to be looking for any abnormal movements that you make while you sleep. So I'll be kind of staying up, watching them sleep, see if they make any abnormal movements, abnormal noises, like do they snore, do they grind their teeth while they sleep, Do they get up and sleepwalk? Okay, all that kind of stuff. So that's video monitoring. Video monitoring is good because it gives us an actual picture of the person while they sleep. Because sometimes people can exaggerate. They can be like, oh, I move so much while I sleep. But when you actually watch them on the video, they don't really move that much at all. Okay, so it's really good for studying sleep disorders. And we will look at more sleep disorders in chapter 10. Sleep diaries are a subjective self-report. Okay, so sleep diaries are basically self-reported questionnaires. It's like I give the person a sleep diary and they basically write down what time they fell asleep, how long it took them to fall asleep, how did they feel about their previous night's sleep, was it good, excellent, bad, whatever. And then they're going to write down what time they woke up, as well as how many times they woke up during the night. So did they just sleep like a baby the whole night, or did they have to get up to go toilet, or did they have to get up because they had a headache or because they weren't feeling sleepy? Okay, now obviously, like we say with other self-reports in research methods, sleep diaries are not accurate. People can lie. I could have fallen asleep at 4:30 a.m., but what would my sleep researcher know? I'm just going to write that I fell asleep at 10 p.m. Okay, so people can lie. So that's one of the issues with the sleep diary. But for some people who are a little bit more honest, sleep diaries can actually hold them accountable. Okay, when you're actually writing down, it's like, you know, when you're on a diet and you're tracking your calories on some app, or you're tracking your macronutrients or whatever on some app, you know, you kind of feel like you're a little bit more accountable because you're writing it down. Okay, so same thing with people who sleep. When a person feels guilty writing that they fell asleep at 4:30 a.m., it might really spark something in them that causes them to change their sleeping habits the next day. Okay, we never know. People are different. Alrighty, it's already 11:50, so honestly, and we have covered, oh wait, I just need to cover one more thing. We will stop after this one slide, the Batman slide, yep. So we'll just cover this slide and then we'll continue the rest tomorrow. Okay, so the last slide we're going through today, which I accidentally placed in the wrong part of the PowerPoint, is brainwave patterns due to drug-induced ASCs. So basically looking at two types of drugs, stimulants and depressants. Okay, so we talk about drugs as obviously changing your brain activity, but then we need to be able to divide them into the two types, okay, because some drugs can actually increase your brain activity and increase your nervous system activity, hype you up, make you very alert. Some drugs, on the other hand, can actually make you feel very calm and drowsy, okay, can really relax you, not in a good way, you know, really decrease your activity in terms of your brain and your nervous system. So the drugs that actually increase your CNS and bodily activity are stimulants, okay? So stimulants are basically drugs, and if you look at the word stimulants, that kind of comes from the word stimulate. Stimulate means to increase activity. So stimulants basically increase your central nervous system and bodily activity. So central nervous system includes your brain, so it's essentially increasing your brain and your bodily activity. If you take a drug, which you obviously should never, but if you do take a drug that is a stimulant, except caffeine is okay. So if you take caffeine or if you drink coffee, that's going to make you more alert, focused, and active, okay? And because you are alert, focused, and active, there's going to be increased beta wave production. Now, we don't really study the brain waves anymore according to Vika for this year, so we can just forget about the part in red here. So one example of a stimulant drug, or a type of drug that's a stimulant, is caffeine. Okay, you've also got other examples there. Yes, correct. So if the brainwaves increase in activity, you will become more, more alert and more active. That's correct. So another example is nicotine. So people think nicotine, you know, people take cigarettes or they, you know, have a smoke to relax themselves, but actually nicotine does stimulate brain and bodily activity, which might be one of the reasons as to why it's so addictive. Ecstasy and ice are also examples of stimulant drugs, okay? Which is why if you've ever seen somebody who's on ice, like they are completely off the rails. Okay, so those are basically stimulant drugs. Depressants, so depressant drugs are basically drugs that decrease your brain and bodily activity. For that reason, they do make a person very relaxed, calm, and drowsy, and don't worry about the brainwaves because they won't make sense anyway for now. Some examples of drugs that, oops, I have a question. No, hopefully not. Okay, none of these drugs should be easy to access except for caffeine and maybe codeine. Okay, but none of the rest. Okay, so yeah, so some examples of depressant drugs are codeine, which if you have heard of the painkiller Panadine, Panadine actually contains codeine as an active ingredient. It's a painkiller. And codeine is highly, highly addictive, okay? In fact, like if you've ever got one of those, you know, really bad coughs that are not related to corona, like a normal cough that's a part of a flu or something, they usually give you codeine cough syrup. And I remember, like, I think last year or the year before, when I went to the doctors to get it, like, they would not give it to me. They thought like I was going to make drugs with it or something, or that I was addicted to it. But they were like, they have to be really careful with how much codeine they can prescribe, because some people are legit like addicted to codeine, like they're addicted to smoking or alcohol. So it's really bad. Okay, codeine is highly addictive because it does automatically reduce your pain, but it's obviously very bad for you in the long term. Okay, alcohol is also a depressant. A lot of people think alcohol is a stimulant because people who are drunk are all like, you know, jumping off tables and like being so loud. But alcohol is actually a depressant. And that's why when people are feeling really stressed, when they drink alcohol, apparently they feel, I don't know, like better and more calm. Heroin, so I don't know, in popular culture, they usually show people shooting up heroin and how they feel so calm after they do that. And that's one of the reasons why heroin is very addictive as well. And morphine is what they give people in hospitals. Again, morphine is highly addictive because it is also a form of pain reduction, okay? Form of pain reduction or a painkiller. Now, what is this Batman thing we're talking about? Batman is just an easy way of remembering the different types of depressants and stimulants. Some of the examples here haven't been mentioned in the table. So depressants are benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines is another word for your antidepressants, more of which you're going to learn about in chapter 11. Alcohol is also an example of depressants, and THC is the scientific kind of name or abbreviation for cannabis. Stimulants, MDMA, which is another word for ecstasy, amphetamines, which is connected to ice and all those other drugs, and nicotine, which is the active ingredient in your cigarettes. Okay, so that's basically just one example in case you're having trouble remembering the examples from this diagram here. Alrighty, so 5 minutes over time, but that's okay. We did cover quite a bit today. So I'm going to basically stop here. Where's my recording thing? Oh, here. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.